All right, so bonjour everybody. Welcome back to the Indigenous Comic Symposium, which is a fantastic, what an amazing day. It's been a real honor to be able to be a part of our, I keep wanting to say our inaugural symposium, but with all of the energy and time that we put into putting this together, I wonder, we're all just gonna fall over afterwards. And so, but it's a real honor to be here. It's an honor to share this space with you. I come to you live from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, this very special place that we're all from, and we're all from in some other way. That's the story of this place, is referring to the life that comes from this place and connected to all of you. I want you all just to take a moment here, and I love that Kateri got us to do this in the last session, but we ask everyone just to think a little bit about the territory in which you are in, wherever you come from on Turtle Island and elsewhere. The peoples you share those relationships with in your own spaces, and how important it is that we live up to those responsibilities in an ethical and kind way. So wherever you are, I want you just to take a moment to think about those relationships, think about the territory that you're on and the people who are sharing that space with you, particularly our Indigenous relatives who are working so hard to ensure that we have healthy and lives in those places. So if you just take a moment, that's great. And on behalf of the organizers, welcome to the Indigenous Comic Symposium. And we've had a wonderful day. We started out with a plenary this morning at 10 a.m. Then we had a conversation with David Robertson. Then we talked about independent comics in the last session. And this is our final afternoon session. We still have a session this evening talking about this place, 150 years retold. And so I'm very excited to have some of the people from this panel and the previous panel and all the rest of the sessions we've had for today to come into that evening panel. Come back at 6 p.m. tonight. 6 p.m. tonight is the This Place panel. Will be hosted by the amazing Candida Rifkind, who, at the University of Winnipeg is really a leader for many of us in the area of comic books, and particularly Indigenous comic books. But this session right here, we're going to talk about Indigenizing Marvel Comics, and you'll meet our contributors in just a moment here. But what an amazing achievement it is to spend time with this. For most of us, we grew up with Marvel Comics and reading X-Men and all the kind of terrible representations that Sean talked about in his talk this morning around Indigenous peoples. And then now here we are talking with Indigenous comic book makers who are doing really innovative, amazing things. What an honor it'll be, and we'll meet them in just a minute here. But we want to thank all of the sponsors who have come with us to join to make this event possible for today. That's the University of Manitoba Department of Native Studies. That's the University of Toronto Scarborough Department of English. That's the University of Manitoba Institute for the Humanities. That's the Highwater Press, as well as Kegedonce Press. And for those of you who are curious, during the chat here today, Sean will be sending out a few messages in the chat about how you can access and how you can get giveaways from today's events. We have several packages from Highwater Press and Kegedonce Press who are giving away books to anyone who participates for today. And so you'll get a chance to be able to access it. So watch for the chat. Because of security settings, we're asking everybody to put your chat in, send it to the organizers, which can either be myself or Sean. Will be able to forward those on, and also Kateri as well. If you see Kateri, I'm sure can integrate as well. We are the co-organizers alongside Lucas, who you'll meet in just a second. And what a great day with all of our sponsors and our partners. But without further ado, I want to introduce you to one of our co-organizers who's been with us tirelessly since really we began to formulate and build this as a one-day symposium. Lucas Tromley is involved with the University of Manitoba Institute for the Humanities. He's also in charge of something really special and unique within the Institute, which is an area of study on graphic novels. And they're called the Graphic Novels Cluster, which is not specifically just around Indigenous graphic novels, but Lucas has taken it upon himself to particularly focus on Indigenous graphic novels for this year, which is really where most of the funding for today comes from. All the honorariums for the speakers, or most of the honoraries for the speakers, they come from small pockets from the two universities, but the University of Manitoba Institute for the Humanities has really taken it upon themselves to do a large portion of that. So we really appreciate the Institute for the Humanities. And Lucas, not only are you a guy that loves comic books, but you get to be a part and hang out with all these cool people. So take it away, Lucas.
Great, thanks, Nigan. Hi, everybody. There's not enough time for me to thank everybody I want to. I want to thank Kateri and Negan and Sean, my co-organizers. I really want to thank the Institute for the Humanities at the University of Manitoba that's been really generous with support. I want to thank all of the panelists for today. It was really great to see so many people make time. But I'd also, and in some ways, mainly like to thank all of you for being here too. I think many of us have had a year full of Zoom time, and you know, the organizers really appreciate that you're adding a little bit more. So thank you very much. My name is Luke, and I teach in the Department of English, Theatre, Film, and Media at the University of Manitoba. Recently, Marvel Comics created a series of anthology comics called Marvel's Voices to showcase the works of creators of color. In November 2020, Marvel Comics released a title called Indigenous Voices, which featured stories about Indigenous heroes, including Echo and Mirage, who I hope we can talk about later. And we are incredibly lucky to have some of the contributors to this issue with us today. So let me just do a moment of introduction. Weshoyot Alvitre is a Tongva and Scottish author and illustrator. She currently resides with her husband and two children in Venturiano, Chumash territory in California. Her work focuses on an Indigenous perspective in projects from children's books to adult market graphic novels. Her most recent work has been Ghost River, The Fall and Rise of the Conestoga, a graphic novel from Red Planet Books and the Library Company of Philadelphia, and At the Mountain's Base, written by Tracy Sorrell, which comes from Coquille. She's also art director on the video game When Rivers Were Trails. Kyle Charles is a Cree member of the Whitefish Lake First Nations. He's an Edmonton-born writer and illustrator, and he's currently writing and drawing his first graphic novel called Someplace Warm. This is for Renegade Arts Entertainment. Kyle's worked for publishers such as Marvel, DC, Image, and Heavy Metal. When he's not working in comics, he provides commercial art for some of the biggest companies in the world, Syncrude, Chorus Entertainment, and he also develops animated TV shows for Nelvana Studios. Finally, Darcy Little Badger is a Lipan Apache writer with a PhD in oceanography. Her work includes short and long fiction, such as the critically acclaimed debut novel Aletsoa, which is a Nebula finalist and the recipient of a Golden Kite honor, as well as comics. Her second novel, A Snake Falls to Earth, is coming this October. So thank you, all three of you, for being here today. This is a real privilege for all of us. Because you've all kind of contributed to the same issue, I'm just going to put questions to all three of you, and maybe you can sort of speak as you will. And just to begin with, I'm really curious how an anthology issue like Marvel Indigenous Voices gets put together. Could you just talk a little bit about how you all got involved?
I think it was the random email, right, guys? Like, I think we all have our own personal stories on, you know, getting that email in our inbox, inquiring if we could maybe participate in this. But
yeah, I have a. So I'm one of those millennials who actually has learned to enjoy talking on the phone. Like, I used to be really afraid of it, but in this case, actually it came through a phone conversation because the editor of Indigenous Voices actually reached out to my agent. So I have an agent who's involved with much of my literary work, but sometimes he gets involved with comics. And he kind of brought forth this mysterious opportunity. So I didn't know much about it because that was when everything was under wraps. You know, there's a lot of NDAs involved with comics. I was like, I would love to talk to the editor about this. So I had a phone call with Sarah, and that's when she really described this idea where Indigenous creators will have the ability to kind of reimagine or just contribute to the universes of existing native superheroes in the Marvel universes. And almost right off the bat, see, I'm a big comic book fan. I really have been since I was a child, thanks to my mom. And I love the X-Men. So the first character I really thought of, like before the editor put out any options for me, I was like, I've got to write Danny Moonstar. Can I please? And fortunately, Sarah was like, yeah, sure. You could write a Danny Moonstar story. because as you know, she is an X-Men character, and she has really cool powers that as a young goth, I really kind of, it resonated with me, her ability to project somebody's potentially worst nightmares into reality as these illusions. So that's kind of how I got involved. And I did just really think it sounded so cool to have not just, you know, indigenous writers, but also indigenous artists. I believe that I'm the only writer here. And I have to say, in terms of comics, the art is just so important and needs to get way more credit than it does, in my opinion, because the work that it goes into creating the art for these, in terms of time, takes a lot longer than writing a script. But yeah, that's how I got involved. It was a really cool conversation I had in my backyard, and I was pretty excited after wrapping it up.
Yeah, for me, I was just kind of kicking it at home, just kind of taking a break, relaxing on the couch, and got a ping on my phone, and said, "Want to draw a Marvel story?" And I was like, yeah, "Who's this?" I just immediately thought that somebody's trying to mess around with me, so I opened it up and read the email, and I was just like, "Wow, this seems really legit." And I read down on the what the editor's name was, and I recognized her name, and I was like, "This is real. Holy crap, this is actually real." But I mean, like, getting to this place, I think we were, for the most part, we were all selected from, you know, either this place, 150 Years Retold, or Moonshot, since Jeffrey was a part of those books. And, you know, he contacted me months and months before this happened and just kind of said, "Hey, can you send me some pages of your recent work?" So I was like, "All right, cool." So I sent it to him and didn't hear back about it. And I was like, "Oh, well, whatever." That happens a lot in the industry, right? You know, kind of just like put feelers out for people and try and figure out, like, you know, whether or not you want to work with them. And I just thought it was one of those cases where, well, maybe, you know, my art didn't really, you know, turn him on. He wasn't interested. But, you know, got that email all those months later and was just like pretty blown away. But, you know, I feel like I've been in the business, like, you know, several years prior to getting into Marvel, and I had worked for like Image and DC, or Image and Heavy Metal and Aftershock, and I kind of just got sick of running around the industry trying to like knock on doors and hat in hand people, and, you know, really try to be like, you know, "Can I get on a book with you? Can I do a book with you?" And it really becomes this kind of popularity contest where you're trying to, like, you know, gain connections and whatever, and it's not so much about the work you're doing or the thought you're putting into it. And I just, you know, I couldn't stand it anymore, so I quit Twitter. I went my own way, and I was like, you know what, you know, like, Indigenous content is on the upward trend, and I need to get ahead of this thing because I want to be part of that first initial wave and make sure that it's done right. So I just, you know, took head on like all these Indigenous projects and just, you know, immersed myself in Indigenous content creating. And, you know, I thought, you know, if I make enough noise here, maybe in 5 years or so, Marvel will come to me, you know what I mean? And like, that way I'm not pursuing, and it's not this whole schmoozing and trying to get along with people who, you know, you can't get along with. And instead you just have these people come to you. And like in less than a year and a half, Marvel was knocking at the door. So I felt pretty validated and happy about that. And even more so because they want Indigenous content. So it's like, all right, here we are. We're ready to go. We're all, you know, I know there's plenty of creators part of the books that I was doing with the anthology. And, you know, it's really exciting to get in there and be a part of the first book for Indigenous Voices.
I mean, it sounds like getting the knock on the door or the call or the ping on the phone was a pretty big moment for all three of you. And I just want to say, I'm not going to put any pressure on anybody to badmouth Marvel Comics today, right? Just to announce that. I do want to ask though, like on a project like this one, sort of what's the balance of creative input on the part of the artists and writers and editorial guidance? I mean, how much freedom did you feel you had?
I would say that for me anyway, just because of the establishment of the character, you know, being established in the universe, the work that had come prior to me joining on, there's a lot of history that you have to sort of respect and then build around or build off of. So the writer of our story, Rebecca Roanhorse, I know that she did her her research. We were both reading and rereading the Echo original storyline. Like I had to dig out all my back issues and stuff from my long boxes in the closet. But I wanted to make sure that I was doing justice to the character. And I think that that's kind of your responsibility as a professional, is to do your proper research and your the work to make sure that that character is represented accurately for who they are in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
So-
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Darcy.
No, I was going to say in terms of freedom, and I actually have a lot of experience working with editors, not just in comics, but also short fiction. I've published a lot of short fiction, books. And because what I write deals with Indigenous cultures, I've had a lot of opportunity to explain things that are important to me and why they need to be in there. So in other words, in this project, I was given a lot of respect and a lot of freedom by the editor. And, my name actually has Badger in it. It's a thing where I do insist on having that relationship where if something is important, culturally, there's this communication between me and the editor, this open communication where we can work to make sure that the story comes through. And, in the past, I've turned down opportunities when I didn't feel like that connection would be there. So it was in this project, personally, and this is just my experience, it was just really great. A great experience. Kyle actually did the art to this this short Danny Moonstar story, which, by the way, can I just say that was just so impressive. Like, as a classic X-Men fan, I just really felt that resonating through, and yet you brought such freshness to it. I won't go on with that, but yeah, there's always a risk, when you're writing about something, not just Native stuff, but like any sort of underrepresented cultural element of your identity, or maybe even, like other types of elements of your identity, where you might run into potentially an editor who just doesn't see things like maybe wants to push stereotypes. So that's always a risk, but at least in this project, I did not experience that. And if I had experienced that, I would have said something. And thankfully, in my history, I've not encountered people who have pushed back and said, no, we need to put this stereotype in. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of very positive working relationships.
Yeah, for my part, Darcy, like when you're working with an editor in comics, they pretty much act as the barrier kind of between the artist and writer, because having creators come together sometimes isn't like the smoothest work relationship. So you need somebody in there kind of translating between the two to be like, so that there's no, because if you're not in the room with the writer, it's really easy to like misunderstand something in an email, because all you're doing is emails. So like, for an editor, like that's kind of their role. They're the one with the overwatch. They're looking at every single moving part of this and keeping the line, moving forward. And when I'm like, the more I talk to an editor, it means the more that I'm having trouble with the script. And on this is really straightforward, clean, concise, 10-page comic that had a full story in it that usually, people would be given 20 pages, which is the standard for Marvel, 20 pages to give in this story. But it, it had a good pace, it hit all the right notes, and Darcy provided a script that didn't leave any kind of detail up in the air. It was all right there. And as far as the editor and like freedom and everything, Sarah was great. She pushed me more to be like, I've seen your other work. Like, you get more experimental than this. Like, feel free to try some stuff on this. And I was just like, no, like, like this is X-Men. This is like, X-Men's my, favorite comic book franchise. I am not taking any chances with anything right yet. Not with this book. I want to make sure everything's very straightforward, straight down the middle. And nail a classic X-Men style, but keeping it updated in terms of like the line work and the presentation of the characters and everything. I didn't want it to be like overly ham-fisted or anything like that, because Darcy wrote a pretty grounded script. So yeah, I might have like maybe shot myself in the foot by not trying more things out, but I just, at this point in time with this story and my first work for Marvel, I just wanted to keep it simple and just straightforward. And you know, Sarah was great. I had a lot of other stuff. Like, I said yes to Marvel when I had like all this other work, and it all came down to the funnel and you know, those 10 or more days of work, which is just like round the clock, go to bed at midnight, wake up at 5, work all day, go to bed at midnight, wake up at 5, and do that. And like, you know, for most part in comics, I mean, that's what you're doing anyways. But yeah, for this, it was just like, you know, now I'm at Marvel. Like, everything else is gone. I'm just going to do this for the next week. And Sarah was awesome. She gave me as much time as she could and was totally patient with me. And, you know, I'm so happy, and we're very fortunate that it all came together like it did, because, you know, everybody's story in the book is fantastic, and I'm really proud of, you know, all the work that we did.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, all three of you have sort of expressed a sense of being responsible to the tradition of the character, or kind of the tradition of the books that you're working on, which is really interesting. Indigenous Voices, for those of you who haven't had a chance to see it yet, it opens with a catalog of Marvel's Indigenous heroes from the past, right? And this includes Thunderbird from X-Men, Puma from Spider-Man, and Shaman and Snowbird from the Canadian team Alpha Flight, which I certainly read a lot. I find it a little bit hard to know how to approach this list, right? Because it seems to be a celebration of Marvel's history of diversity. But I think it could also be read the other way as well. There are definitely some sidekicks and some stereotypes in there as well. I'm just curious if there are Indigenous characters from Marvel or from DC that are sort of memorable to the three of you, like one way or the other.
I think for me personally, Echo was sort of like a bucket list character. I never had Indigenous representation growing up of a female, for one, or a Native person, for two, that was done in a non-stereotypical way. So when that book came out for me in high school, I was there every, you know, release date for the next issue and buying all of the variant covers for the back issues. And what David Mack did to get into her head in those stories really changed my perspective on what I could do as a comic book artist, and that stories didn't have to be told linearly, and they could be told very abstractly and in-depthly. And, you know, I think he really did justice to creating a character that was really well-rounded. And I love that her, you know, her superpower comes from her disabilities. So the things that she may lack that other people don't have to really deal with have become things that have created her stronger in all these other regards. And I really related to that on a very, you know, primal level. But I honestly, I can't really name very many other characters growing up that I'm like, oh yeah, that was like, you know, great representation, or, you know, that wasn't problematic in one way or another. But we kind of, you know, as a kid, you kind of just, if there's one little thing you can sort of latch onto, that's great. But I mean, if we can provide characters that are well-rounded and human and aren't full of spirit animals and totems and all these, you know, stereotypes, and create something where people can empathize with it, I think that's really powerful. And I hope that's kind of where comics go from here on out with Indigenous characters.
Darcy or Kyle?
Yeah, sorry, it's always hard with Zoom calls because you
I know,
can't
I'm
really
sorry.
like just turn to one side. I guess I'll go. So, you know, a lot of my favorite characters actually growing up tended to be scientists or kind of like gothy. So that's one reason I like that they gave me the opportunity to create a new mutant in this only, it's a 10-page story, so there's not a lot of room, but a new mutant did appear, and he was this Apache teenager, like very classic X-Men. A teenager comes into powers. It's like almost like coming of age, but his powers were just like, they're like monster related. This is a kid who I was thinking the type of character I would have loved to see as a young reader. But yeah, I was all into Spider-Man, especially. Gosh, I loved, okay, so he's a villain, but Doc Ock was like, I just thought it was so cool that somebody could use science to like give themselves the metal tentacles. I liked a lot of DC properties, Zatanna, Clarion the Witch Boy. So, you know, thinking back, Danny Moonstar, if I had to choose one native character who's my favorite, that's really the character who springs to mind. And again, it's just because I did like her role in the X-Men. She had a lot of character growth, I think, throughout the decades that she appeared in these comics, to the point where she started out as almost a resistant student, and then she actually grew into a teacher. And I like what they're doing with her in the New Mutants. I'm following that. But yeah, it was almost like this Marvel Voices was less of a celebration of past diversity and more of a celebration of potential. So the potential the future has to represent these characters or even new characters in a more positive light, but by bringing in input from, you know, actual Indigenous creators.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like, you know, something that you know, I learned in Native Studies and Native Art at U of A was something that really stuck with me. Is one of my instructors told me, like, in the Native Arts class, like, I don't want to see anybody drawing you know, a buffalo skull. I don't want to see any kind of headdresses or anything like that. She's like, you don't need to, like, if that's not what you do, don't do it. She said, you know, you're the Indigenous person. What you create is Indigenous art, regardless of, like, you know, the look or content. And if you're not hitting a certain you know, watermark of, like, you know, native art that's expected to be native art, like, you know, don't bring that to class. You know, like, create something new. And like, I always felt like what I wanted to be a part of is like contemporary native stories told by you know, our people living in this day and age, because whether we like it or not, colonization has happened. So where do we go from here now? And moving forward, to have a platform like this, you know, with Marvel, it's like, okay, well, we can't erase what's come before, but we can absolutely improve on it from here on out. So, you know, like, let's be a part of that wave. And you know, growing up, like, you know, like I said, I love the X-Men, and I remember reading the New Mutants. My Uncle Jim had you know, hundreds and hundreds of comic books and this long boxes of this stuff. And I remember reading, or not reading, I wouldn't read anything when I was younger. I would just look at the pictures. But Bill Sienkiewicz did the artwork for the Demon Bear storyline, and it blew me away as a kid. I was like 5 years old, and I was like, "What is this? Like, what? Like, you know, it is so different from everything else that I was reading in the X-Men." You know, it was like Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri, and, you know, really clean arts like you know, Paul Smith and stuff like that. And then you get to that work, and it's like, holy crap! Like, what is this stuff? So, and then, you know, noticing like Mirage in the stories, like, even if there are some imagery where, like, you know, I feel like, you know, honestly, I could take what I could get. Like, even if it was kind of trashy, I love seeing something at least, and I could show my mom and be like, look, there's a native character in this X-Men book. And you know, she would kind of look at him and like maybe roll her eyes a bit and be like, well, that's good, but like, look at how they're represented. But either way, though, to be a part of this book moving forward, like, I think that's what we're all striving to do. I mean, you know, whether we're conscious of it or not, like, we're all living in this day and age. Like, you know, I think it's up to us to tell our stories moving forward. And yeah, I think that, you know, all of us part of this book did that. And I see it in all the stories, and just very happy to be a part of it.
I mean, I'm getting interesting comments in the chat about, you know, whether you feel a certain kind of responsibility to the sort of, you know, maybe mixed or problematic kind of comics tradition you're working in. One person is asking, do you feel that you have to correct the mistakes of the past? Another person is asking whether you feel that part of your project is to reclaim problematic figures so that they're more than the stereotypes that maybe they began as. Like, is that a responsibility that you feel, or that you take on?
I'll let one of you guys go first.
Well, it's weird for me personally, because a lot of the work that I do outside of this particular book deals with that. It deals with either reclaiming Indigenous voices from past historical events that were never given a perspective from, oftentimes, the victims of, historical attacks or the victims of colonization. Oftentimes it's written from a missionary's perspective, or it's written from a white history perspective, and all the academic materials that might back that up are never from an Indigenous perspective, and that's for a variety of reasons. So in that respect, I mean, if I talk about my non-Marvel work, that would be a whole different ballgame. I feel like the work that I did here is, I took a character that I felt comfortable with, that was a representation that I felt wasn't deeply flawed. They offered me different characters before. I kind of reached out and said, look, I would really love to do Echo, because I feel personally like close to her, just because I followed it since the beginning. And the other characters that they gave me had the potential for past stereotypes and maybe disrespectful portrayals in the past. And I didn't want to deal with that, honestly, for myself, because I didn't feel like I should have to bear the burden of fixing maybe somebody else's stereotype. And because I'm not writing the story, I'm relying on another, a writer to handle that material. I don't know what they're going to hand me to draw. So yeah, you kind of walk a fine line. And I think as the artist, if I'm handed a script and there's things in it that I'm finding problematic, then that just creates more work on my behalf too, because then I'm having to go back to the editor and the writer and be like, look, I don't feel okay handling this material because of, X, Y, or Z. So yeah, I felt, for me personally, getting involved in a project like this, it was tiptoeing carefully in a way that I could best represent a Indigenous character in a way that I felt comfortable with, that didn't necessarily have a very problematic past or misrepresentation, because I didn't want to create extra emotional baggage for myself by taking that on.
Yeah, and I guess, so I'm another person who, most of my work is outside of Marvel. Like I'm even writing the script of a graphic novel now that would be published by the same people who published my books. And that's something I can't talk about much, but it was the type of thing where I only work with IPs if I genuinely, as a creator, think, oh my gosh, this is something that I would have fun doing. This is something that I'm comfortable doing. But on the other hand, thinking back, just the fact that I, growing up, read so much Marvel and DC just shows what an impact these comics have on our youth and on our adults. So I do think it's good that these stories are going to be out there, and I do think it's good that they're doing a better job getting different voices to contribute to them. I have to say, without talking much about what I'm doing, I'm also writing, characters who aren't Native, but are characters who I enjoyed reading about. And that's the type of thing when you work in comics with pre-existing characters, often you're jumping, from one thing to another. So it's not the type of thing where I will only exclusively write Native characters. I enjoy writing them because you can really think back, you're writing what you know, it makes it easier. And that there are kids out there who haven't seen themselves in many, popular TV shows or comics or books who will suddenly maybe read something that resonates with them. But yeah, there have been, and this isn't Marvel, but there have been projects I have turned down just because the stereotypes of the past I felt very uncomfortable, and that's okay, because it's not our, at least in my opinion, it's not our responsibility to fix things that other people did wrong. I mean, if we want to work because we enjoy it, yeah, sure. But yeah, I don't think it's a type of thing where I feel responsible to fix stuff other people, are doing. I do feel in my work, I do feel that as a storyteller, I do have a responsibility to you know, to my people, because the Lipon Apache people get very little representation. So I do feel this weight almost with every book I publish, with everything I write that involves my culture, just this weight, and unfair or not, that I'm carrying, where I'm like, well, this is going to be one of the few depictions of Lipon folks, you know, in the fantasy, science fiction, or even beyond that, you know, in any sort of realm. And that's something that I think that lots of marginalized creators have to deal with, and whether it's fair or not, it's there. But yeah, I guess that's my answer to that.
Yeah, I agree with Darcy. I don't. If that was thrust upon me, you know, some kind of responsibility or duty, I would reject it, because, you know, like she said, it's not up to us to go back and noodle and, you know, rewrite or reapproach whatever's been done 20, 30, 40 years ago. I think that for the most part, if you're not ignorant to it, you kind of understand that, you know, times have changed, and what was acceptable back then isn't so today, and that there's so many more dimensions to our cultural identity than have been published before. So yeah, we're here to, like, you know, take part and, like, you know, join those ranks, and then we have with this book right here. So I feel like, you know, in particular with I can only speak to the story that me and Darcy did, that we've done that. That it was a contemporary story, and it was set in a contemporary world, and it wasn't, you know, something that you've seen before. And it's, I just feel like as a native creator, you know, what I put out or publish or write or draw, whatever it may be, in whatever industry, my intentions for our people are good. It's an inherent wellness that I'm looking for. And any story that I write or draw, there's some form of catharsis that I'm trying to reach through my art, because you know, we've all been through some trying times, and if you haven't, then awesome. But if you have, then, like, you're probably in the business of art to express something, a thought or emotion, or rewrite something that you thought was wrong, or like in your own stories, not necessarily Marvel or their characters. And like, as somebody who's, you know, currently, like, writing a story about, like, you know, the toxic nature of a province like Alberta in the south, where it's still 1975 down there. Like, I remember moving from the city I'm living in is Edmonton, which is, like, you know, got a high population of Indigenous people. I remember, like, first time I went down to Calgary, really, and hang out down in Kensington in the art section of the town, and you know, this ACAD was up the road, and I was like, damn, yeah, like, there's, like, you know, good vibe down here. Going down the street and then seeing, like, a pack of skinheads. I've never seen that before in my life. Here in Edmonton, you would never see that happen. Never. I've roamed these streets, and it's from my hood on the north side, and, like, you know, down the south side, wherever. Never seen a skinhead in my life, because that just wouldn't be tolerated here. But I go down to Calgary, and it's openly accepted. Nobody was saying anything to them. They walked by me, and I was just like, what is going on, you know? But yeah, anyway, so those are my experiences. And, like, I know that, like, the story I'm writing about is a small town in the south where, like, you know, stuff is just kind of, I remember I moved there, and there's a case of an assault where it's, like, you know, a family of Native people just got assaulted walking the streets, you know, broad daylight. I've had my brother, who was, like, you know, really charismatic, charming guy, super friendly, go down to a bar down there, and, like, you know, was almost killed, almost stomped to death by a hockey team of white folk. You know what I mean? Like, this stuff is happening. So, like, if I'm taking in my experiences and I write something passionately about it, like, that's my responsibility. That's my duty, to express what I feel as an artist. But to go back and, like, you know, try to rewire something so that Marvel doesn't have to live with, you know, the fact that they published some really short-sighted stuff in the 70s, it's none of my business, you know. But I'll be happy to do a new story for you in your book, you know, Indigenous voices. So yeah, if anybody, you know, like, any kind of responsibility or duty, is like, that's the only duty I have, is to represent myself as the artist I am, you know. Other than that, there is none.
Well, and you know, your work, you know, it's obviously effective. I mean, I'm getting comments in the chat of people complaining that they can't find copies of it. You know, that comic book shops are sold out, and you know, people are saying, you know, there needs to be a reissue. There needs to be some sort of trade compilation, because it would be a great teaching resource. Fans want to read it. I had to read it on my phone, which is just, you know, maybe I'm showing my age now, but just seems kind of sacrilegious. So I think it's a real shame that more people haven't seen it.
On that note, I would suggest maybe those people could write to Marvel directly or tweet them directly and ask them for a second printing and show that support, because unless they hear from the masses that are feeling that way about the publication, they may just let it go into the back issues and then it was a one-time thing. So we need that support, and we need people speaking out for, you know, more of this material.
Well, I see 109 people on the call right now, and my research cluster's Twitter has lots of...
A tweet takes, you know, no time at all, guys. So.
yeah, exactly. You know, again, I don't want to kind of go too deeply into the issue, because I know not everybody has had a chance to read it, but it is just amazing and really, really interesting. The stories are all really different and very powerful in different ways. I actually had a question about how you know, how it looks, and you know, obviously the look of superheroes is really important, and I think particularly with Indigenous superheroes, there's obviously a tradition of a certain kind of foregrounding of sort of Indigenous appearances, which, I mean, Kyle's already expressed a little bit of impatience with. I mean, Weshoyot and Kyle, can you talk a little bit about sort of some of the decisions you had to make when you were drawing Echo and Mirage? I mean, you know, their costumes, their bodies, their movements. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, I just worked on Mirage, but yeah, I mean, I just kind of drew from, you know, my real life, you know, from my girlfriend at the time, and that's who the character, like the look of her, obviously, like it's Marvel, so you have to make it look kind of like they've done in the past, but for the most part, like it's you know, based on my ex-girlfriend, and you know, her, like, she smirks throughout the book. Like, whenever somebody thinks they have her lined up, you know, whether it's like, you know, at gunpoint or whatever, she's got this kind of smirk on her face, just kind of like, you know, like, you don't have me, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know what it takes to, you know, get over on somebody like me. I just try and keep that kind of attitude the forefront of my mind, and when writing, or like not writing, but when drawing these characters and like their expressions or how they move, or I tried to really make sure that, like, you know, when Mirage fought, like, it looked like she was trained. So, like, you know, like when she does a judo throw, it's proper. Like, she's got the proper stance, the proper, like, you know, the distribution of weight. She's like throwing somebody and just, like, you know, hurling them into a rock or something like that. It all looks real and all looks proper. But as far as that, like, yeah, I don't know. I just pulled from people in my life. You know what I mean? I didn't have to really dream something up. Like, you know, the attitudes and the way they carry themselves, it's all just pulled from people in my life, which is nice to do, because I haven't done that for any other book. Primarily, you know, I've only worked with white creators doing white stories and stuff like that, which is like, I'm not knocking that either. You know, I'm happy to be a part of this book, but I'm like also happy that I got to like work on some cool sci-fi stuff, you know, and yeah, so bringing that kind of stuff into this book in particular was great. Is awesome. It makes you feel good when you're up late at night and you're, you know, working against the clock. It's easier when you're drawing somebody that, you know, you care about. You pretty much, you know, you have that character in your mind, you care about the character, and you care about the person who's influencing that. It's fantastic, you know, it feels really good. And yeah, it was really really joyful doing it.
Yeah, I'll say for Echo, one thing I really loved about her when she was introduced into the comics is that her whole, you know, outfit is so like homemade looking. Like, she literally, like, she was a dancer. She was very, like, you know, not my son's in here, he wants to get on the video. She was very like nondescript, and she was in a sports bra, and she sort of added some like dancing tape. Someone, mom is not gonna be on the Zoom right now, okay, babe? So she had sort of like sports tape that she'd wrap on her arms, and she stuck some feathers in there. And I love the fact that her physical appearance changed depending on what she was dealing with. It was almost like theatrics. Like when she was going through a really tough time, you know, she would add to her costume or deplete from her costume. So I really tried to keep that in mind. And he is 4 and he has fun with the video camera. In regards to like her new costume, they actually sent me the cover that David Mack had done, and it had her new outfit on it, and I thought it was really amazing to see. And then I was like, oh man, she's sort of upgraded to this very modern, sleek type of thing. So I was thinking, you know, modern dance wear, and just modern athletic wear that's comfortable to move in. I mean, I live in like leggings and dance wear, and I love the ease of, you know, comfort and stuff. And I always wanted to take ballet when I was young, and I couldn't afford, you know, my parents couldn't afford dance lessons and stuff. So I was always in awe of these girls walking around in leotards and leggings. And I just think there's something so beautiful because it accents the human body in a way where you can just appreciate anatomy. And as an artist, it's something that like is really fun to draw because you don't have to worry about garment folds and, you know, attachments of armor or this and that. It's just literally the body in motion.
I mean, again, I hesitate to go too deep into this because I know not everyone's had a chance to read the issue, although the chat is blowing up, right? I think that, I hope that's going to change. I mean, in some ways, your stories are very different. I mean, the story of Echo hitting back, it's a very difficult story, right? It's a story sort of about endurance and loneliness. It's a big contrast to Mirage Multifaceted, which is really a story of kind of victory and healing and community building. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the real world situations, maybe the real world politics that you were kind of trying to address through the sort of genre of the superhero comic?
Yeah, and actually, so there's a couple of things. The first is I follow X-Men, so without going too much into it, because it's the whole thing. You'll have to read a lot to catch up. But there's this new mutant nation called Krakoa, and reading these things, I wondered, okay, well, how would Krakoa, if they're dealing with countries and stuff, how would they deal with the sovereign, you know, different native nations within the United States or beyond the United States? So that was one issue that kind of influenced by real world, but also the comic world, you know, just the world of X-Men and the events that were happening right when this comic came out. But it was also, so Mirage or Danny, she is also a on again, off again Valkyrie. And I often see comments on articles about her saying like, oh ho ho, she's a Valkyrie, but also native. Like there's some sort of problem with that. And so one thing I want to address is that as any person, you know, native heroes can be many things at one time, and that doesn't take away from any one component of them. So those were the two, and also it was just really a love story to, you know, the classic X-Men comics that I loved as a child. So it was that classic story of a young mutant coming into powers and those powers being dangerous, and the X-Men trying to find a way to help this kid. So just all those things came together. But yeah, it was influenced by very real issues.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say shortly that I think that the way Echo's character was handled in this is that she isn't the same person she was when the series launched. I think she's been burnt by several of the Marvel men, and she's kind of a little fed up with it. I think she kind of followed her heart a little bit too many times, and I feel the writer really kind of wrote from that place and presented a new aspect to her character, which I thought was really interesting. So I'm kind of curious to see where they take it.
Yeah, the first big panel of the Echo story is Echo's phone. Her phone is getting blown up by all of these garbage men like Wolverine and Daredevil, right? And she just needs, you know, she just needs a moment. Yeah, I mean, just, you know, in some ways, I thought that the story is really sort of even though they're both short, they kind of made a big impact on me. And let me just sort of just want to sort of selfishly share my reactions before we go on. I mean, one of the things that I really liked about the Mirage comic was it sort of takes up this trope of mutants as a kind of oppressed, colonized population, which I think in the past has been a little bit hard to square with the fact that, you know, the X-Men were all white and abled and lived in a giant mansion in upstate New York. And I think that I really appreciated how your sort of, your story gave that a kind of political substance that maybe it was maybe a little bit thin beforehand. And I have to say with the Echo, there's something that I found incredibly wrenching with the Echo story. It starts when Echo is sort of invited on a mission by Captain Marvel, right? Again, you know, she's happy to be not dealing with the men who are bothering her. Echo's a deaf character, and Captain Marvel signs to her in a way that seems very sympathetic. But very quickly we realize that she hasn't been dealing with Captain Marvel at all. She's been dealing with Loki, and I just found that a real kind of gut punch. I wonder if that captures the dynamic of working with big press comics at all, but you think you're dealing with Captain Marvel, you're actually dealing with Loki, but again, you know, that was just my speculation. I did want to ask, you know, you all have kind of amazing careers when you're kind of working in all kinds of diverse fields, right, in all, you know, very different forms. I guess my question is, do you ever have a sense of bumping up against certain kinds of limits when you're working within kind of superhero comics? Like, are there things that you can't talk about, or things that are harder to talk about?
Like, that's such a loaded question. Do you mean the actual characters, like dealing with people with special superhero powers, or do you mean the world of publishing in mainstream? It's a very loaded question.
It is. And again, no one has to badmouth Marvel Comics, but I mean, you know, with characters, you know, even with the form, the kind of the formal aspects of superhero comics, obviously the realities of the publishing world.
Yeah, you know, I don't know what the experiences of, you know, for everyone. But like, you know, I've been working in comic books mainstream since 2013. You know, my first series was 68, which came out from Image Comic Books, which is the third largest publisher in North America. So, you know, I was fortunate enough that my instructor at my college was a comic book creator. His name's Nat Jones, and he, you know, worked on Death Dealer and, you know, plenty of other stuff. Like, he worked on Spawn as well. So he was kind of my bridge into that, and it wasn't an easy bridge. Like, it wasn't like he just said, hey, come on over and we'll get you your own thing to do at Image. It was like a year of like, your work's not good enough, your inking's not strong enough, you need to work on this, your composition here sucks. For a year straight, every Sunday we get together, we work together, he'd tear apart my stuff, until finally, like, yeah, I got to a point where he's like, all right, well, now you're ready to go. So getting in was hard enough, but you know, once you get there, you know, especially with something like Image, like, if you're not on a book that's selling north of 10,000 comics, like, you're not making enough to live, you know. So I mean, like, I would say the first, like, I don't know, maybe, you know, 10 or 15 books I did, like, I didn't get any money for it. You know, I was, you know, and I don't come from a background, you know, where like somebody can give me a house to live in and, like, you know, it's all gravy for me and I can just work on my comic books and slowly get there. And like, to put this in perspective, like, I've worked for a major publisher who I signed a contract with, and, you know, we agreed, here's my page rate, I do the work for you, you pay me this amount of time after I'm done. Which is also, you know, in the illustration game, a pain in the butt anyways. But I signed a contract, so I've got a binding contract with somebody. And 2.5 months after I was supposed to get paid, I finally did. And only through threatening to quit the book that I was still working on and had already lost my home, right, over this. And you know what they said to me when I talked to the head publisher? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know your situation. It's like, you didn't know my situation. I work for a living in comic books, man. Like, that's my situation. That's how I pay my bills. That's how I pay my rent. How do you live? You know? And like, when I talk to other comic book creators, like, this is why I distance myself from the comic book community. Like, I quit Twitter. I quit talking to all the creator friends that I made, because coming up in the business, that's what you're supposed to do. That's how you get jobs. You make friends, and you know, they get you on the books, or they pass you along to somebody else who needs something done. And I was like, what a racket, you know? And like, I'm talking to this creator, and he's affluent and, you know, white, and he's like, you know, very like kind of snobby, but whatever, you know, that's for the most part, most of the comic books. And he's telling me like, yeah, you know, we just got back to Calgary because, you know, we got sick of staying at my house in Vancouver. And I was like, oh, you have a house in Vancouver? He's like, yeah, my grandmother, when she passed away, she has a bunch of different properties that she gave one to me. And I was like, holy crap. It's like, so how are you doing? Like, you're just paying for a place here? And he's like, no, my girlfriend, she's got, her parents own a bunch of properties all over Calgary, so they gave us a house. And I was just like, my mind is blown, man, because like, I've been living on the streets before drawing comics. You know, literally at a park bench drawing comics, and then going to like Staples and like photocopying and stuff like that to get my work out. And here this dude's like, yeah, well, I bounce around from Vancouver to Calgary like it's nothing. And it's like, that's what most comic book publishers think that their artists are, or their writers are, is that people who just live abroad and do whatever they want, have money from family. And that's why they can say something like that to me, going, I didn't know your situation. You know what I mean? Like, so like with, like, I've got like kind of a contentious point of view with big publishers and stuff like that. And like, when Marvel comes knocking, of course I'm going to say yes. But I knew that that would lead to other things, and it did. And I was smart about it. You know, I got on the news. I said certain things. I was like, yeah, here's who I am. Here's what I've gone through. And then it hit and it connected, and I got to do my own exclusive cover. And the next thing you know, I'm on the national news across Canada. And then I'm getting all these job offers, and like, life suddenly just flipped over to a way more successful state. And it's like, of course, because Marvel is that platform. Now I'm being provided with like other companies I'm working with that I can't say anything yet, but like the largest shoe producers in the world come to me and say, hey, we want to give you this platform because we've seen what you did with Marvel. Now we want to provide one for you, for us over here. You know what I mean? So yeah, like, comic books I've got a strange relationship with, and that's why I started like my own publishing company. That's why I'm going to, like, you know, take the lead on something like this, so that Indigenous creators don't get put over a barrel anymore for their content, that they can come to a company where it's like, yes, we want the best for you, the creator, because if it's not good for you, then it's not good for your art, and therefore it suffers everywhere. So, you know, that's why, like, the graphic novel I'm producing is going to be through Renegade Arts, but also my publishing company, Unregistered Studios. So, yeah, like, yeah, I've more than several years of dealing with this kind of stuff. It's not a fun game, and if you don't have like a strong will, like, you'll break and you won't make it anywhere.
Yeah, oh, go on.
Ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to reiterate the money. So even if I wanted to survive just writing freelance comics, I could not survive on that. That's why I have, and even, so there was a recent conversation called Publishing Paid Me, as an effort to kind of talk about maybe discrepancies in the amount of money advances get. So people have been more open about their advances for a book. So I'm talking about Alvitre. And Alvitre, first of all, it's published by an indie publisher. So I got to put that out there, because obviously my experience is different than a big five. And actually I did pretty well for an indie publisher. My advance, I think the take home after agent cut, and this is before taxes, was $15,000. And that's for a year of work. So that's what you have to survive on for a year. And yet I can rely on the sales of Alvitre in the future to support me. And that's not something that you can do with freelancing work, at least not the kind I've taken on. Like, you get a one-time payment for your work. For artists especially, I don't think artists get paid enough. And then that's it. So it really is, especially for people who, like, I don't come from, we really struggled when I was growing up. My parents gave me so much love, but financially, you know, we not well off, to the point where, when I went to college, I had a financial aid-based scholarship. So they paid for almost the entire college, and yet the hundreds that they had to pay every month, that's actually how my parents lost their house. Is I learned they were trying to pay for my college and they didn't want to tell me. So I just learned this like recently, and I think back now and thinking like, I wish I'd known. So it's the type of thing where you don't come from money if you don't have a lot of resources. You really can't survive just doing freelance work unless you just work so hard. Personally, that's why I even if I really wanted to, which I don't, I enjoy actually doing books and graphic novels and all sorts of stuff. But if I was the type of person who was like, I want to just write for Marvel and DC and that's going to be my life, like I don't think financially I would be able to support myself. And I don't have children, it's just me. So I don't, when you add on family to the mix, when health issues, like where does the insurance come from? How do you get insurance? Like, I don't know in Canada or US if it's comparable, but in the US, our medical bills are super high. So if you don't have like a work that gives insurance to you, then you're in trouble. So I do have to say that's the biggest thing. That's why I tell people, sometimes it's beneficial to have another part-time something that you can rely on. If things get tough, if you have to like get that emergency medical bill, so you aren't really overwhelmed by that. Because I think there's a conversation currently being had, because there are a lot of people like the original creators of many superheroes ended up living without much benefits from all of that work they put into these heroes who have really revolutionized DC and Marvel. So there is a conversation being had on how creators are being paid, but right now it really is the money's the biggest issue, and it's a very sad thing that because a lot of youth, especially the Native youth I work with who want to get into comics, they don't have a lot. So like, how do you tell someone, well, right now it's really not set up to support somebody? It's because like we have to eat, we have to get our broken bones fixed. Things happen, and that's a big roadblock.
Yeah, what you guys say brings up so many important points. I mean, as freelancers, we have to pay our own insurance. Like I'm lucky my husband has a job that has insurance included, and before going freelance 100% of the time, again, I had to make that choice of like, look, if I do this, I'm losing my insurance, so we need to have something set up here. I've been doing comics for almost 20 years now, and when I started through independence. I've run the gamut. I've worked for Marvel, DC, I've done shadow work for Vertigo and Image. I worked for Howard Chaykin as his apprentice for several years in college when I was sort of really mad at the industry. I had been going, to San Diego Comic-Con with portfolio reviews and constantly getting shut out, and oftentimes not being taken seriously because I was a female. And back then, this was, like 2005. I had one of the editors at a portfolio review, and he's sitting there, and I had a Batman shirt on, and I plopped my portfolio down on the table, and I know who this editor was. He worked at Dark Horse Comics, and he said, "You're not serious, are you?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He's all, you're, this is like a guy's world, And that was before even opening my portfolio. He just thought I was there as like a joke. And that's stuck with me like crazy. And that editor has since sort of turned over, and like, he sent me an email years and years after that. And he just wanted to like, I think maybe fix his mistake and be like, good job. But I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you have to come up against. There's a lot of sexual harassment in the industry, and you talk about working for independent, or trying to make friends in the industry and move up. And as a female, a lot of the time those editors that contact you or people that contact you with jobs and stuff, they also kind of like are trying to get on friendly terms with you. And I've experienced that more than once. And I think it's a real shame. And so now, I know I don't want to bring up, the huge comic book gate thing that's going on, and the sexual harassment in comics, but it is a real thing. And especially like this year, I had like this weird sort of rehash. I did some work for Dark Horse for an Umbrella Academy book that they had done. And I did work, I think, 10 years ago when Umbrella Academy first came out. I had the editor who I met at San Diego Comic Con, contact me, and he asked if I could have a piece in the back of issue 6 of the very first series that came out. And at the time, he couldn't pay me, so it was just like a freebie. And over that time frame, after I had done the second cover and everything was in the bag and stuff, it comes out that he had, been a predator in the industry, and he ended up getting fired. And he was a huge name, and he edited tons and tons of books. And it's just sort of the underbelly of the industry that you have to deal with. So you really need to develop a very hard shell, not only to deal with the underpayment. You need to really fight for page rates and stick to page rates. And I find that the major publishers oftentimes have the lower page rates compared to independents, which is a huge shame, because you're making more money if you can sell your physical artwork on the back end than you are for the work that you're actually doing for them. So, I mean, the business side behind comics and the problems that lay in that, I think, could be an entirely separate discussion. And the world of comics definitely has a lot of things that they need to fix for the betterment of all the creative people that work within it.
I just want to say to the three of you, I'm seeing a lot of support for you in the chat. And I think a lot of people watching really appreciate an insight into this side of the industry that I think is really, really difficult. One doesn't always see, fans don't always see, and I'm getting a lot of support for the three of you. So I just want you to know that. It's an interesting context to put Marvel Indigenous voices in. I feel like at the beginning of our conversation, we all felt really good, and I feel as though now we're, thanks to the three of you, we're mindful of the many forms of exploitation that still exist in the industry. I don't think that this makes Marvel Indigenous voices any less important, but I think it is it's a cautionary, it's a caution that we shouldn't be too self-congratulatory that the bad old days are in fact the bad old days. It's obviously something that's still still very much with us. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that we're so lucky that the three of you came to talk with us today. Because again, it's an aspect of the industry, it's an aspect of this genre that many of us love so much, but we don't necessarily always see.
I would say, I think as a creator or a writer or an artist, if you want to get into this industry, do it because you love it. Don't focus on any sort of notoriety. Don't focus on the money aspect of it. Don't focus on getting a superhero title from Marvel, Do it because there's something in it that you, like Kyle was saying, you really want to tell a story. And that's where your love and passion is going into, because it's something that's deep inside of you and you want to do it for that sake, and take all the financial stuff out of it. And if you still want to make comics because it makes you feel good at the end of the day and you feel like it's something that's helping you change, your world in some way, that's the reason to do it. And all the rest of the stuff, like, you're going to have highs and lows and positives and negatives, and it's all a learning experience. So try not to take any of those hits or, highs and stuff in a negative way. Just learn from them and don't let them turn you into a embittered person, because it's very easy to do. And you see a lot of creatives and stuff that have been burned by the industry. And then they just cut themselves off and they forget why they wanted to do it in the first place. And it's because they found something that allowed them to communicate in a way that they, feel very passionate about. So.
Yeah. Captain Marvel may still be Loki. I think I want to thank the three of you for being with us today. We're so lucky. You've been so generous with your time. I think right now we should transition. I'm going to, you know what, maybe we've got one more question, if I think there's time. The question is there space within Marvel to create Indigenous narratives outside of the superhero realm? This is a question from Kateri. It's a really good question.
Yeah, that's a good question, because like a lot of the, when you think of Marvel, you really think of superheroes, but there are inventive things out there. I'm wondering. I wonder about that myself. So I do think that there is space, and it's the type of thing that you probably have to fight for, but I wouldn't rule it out. And I think that if there does end up being a Marvel kind of Indigenous story, that's not really, maybe it's an investigative journalist or something. I don't know. I don't know what. Then yeah, I think that would be really cool. But I should also say that there's also other opportunities to publish graphic stories, especially like I'm very focused on young adult because that's just what I write. But I'm noticing that young adult graphic novels are starting to be more common, and publishers that traditionally mostly publish books are starting to publish these graphic novels. Personally, for me, that's where I found a really good place to tell a story that is not superhero, but that I hope that people who enjoy superhero comics will also enjoy reading this. But yeah, what about the rest of you? What do you think?
I would say in order to do that, I think Marvel needs to start in hiring Indigenous and Native editorial staff and people that work on board. So it's not just creative talent that's at the bottom tier. And I've said this in other, podcast interviews. They need to have people in on the company that understand things from an Indigenous viewpoint before they get there. And they also need to have established something where IPs, if they do come up with new original pieces, are protected and paid for, and that they're not just having these people write things and then 5-10 years down the line making movies and making millions of dollars off of their IP. I'll second what Darcy said too, and I think major publishers are actually, from what I've seen, more supportive of having non-superhero and just really unique Indigenous stories come out in the form of graphic novels, young adult novels. And what I have really loved is seeing that places like universities are encouraging the academic world to support teaching curriculum that it comes out in tie with the publications. So, I worked on a graphic novel and we have teaching curriculum that were written with it that teachers can utilize in their classroom, that university teachers can help to teach broader perspectives on the material that's in the graphic novel or the young adult novel. And I think that support system is something that's amazing that was never really existent before and is really supported now by major publishers. And I hope it continues, I really do.
Sorry, can I just ask, what is that graphic novel with the those extra support for educators?
One I was involved with personally was called Ghost River, and it was published through Native Realities Press with support from the Library Company of Philadelphia. And the project manager, Will Fenton, he wrote a grant for a Pew Arts and Heritage grant, and the grant actually supported all of the work that we did for the graphic novel, but we also have a website where you can download the graphic novel for free if you're an educator, and then there's curriculum guides that teachers have written and submitted. So it's a really, really supportive system, and it was published through an independent publisher, Native Realities Press. So in doing that, we are supporting independent Native-run publishers as opposed to high-end publishers, or I guess the top 5 or the larger publishers. So I think supporting independent publishers is really, key too in creating change.
Oh yeah, can I just emphasize, you mentioned intellectual property, and I think that's something that I'd like to just touch briefly on. So when I write with, a big publisher, it's kind of like playing in the sandbox of their universe. And that's something that I personally, as a fan and as a writer, really enjoy doing. But I also have to keep in mind this graphic novel that I'm writing. It is very personal. It involves 4 Lipon kids who I invented myself. It involves elements of our Lipon like folklore, and I would not necessarily. I would not be comfortable giving all of that to somebody else. So by publishing it with Levine Carrito, I in fact keep control of that as my own like imagination, as my own intellectual property, you know, and that's something you just have to be very wary. If you're working in the sandbox of another person's universe, anything you input into them, it's almost like giving it to them. Mm-hmm. So be careful about what you're giving away, and always think, is this something that perhaps I would like to retain some rights over? And I find this especially important when things are very personal, very culturally specific. And that is, so that's just something to be aware of. And one thing that I've appreciated about having an agent is he explains everything in a contract to me, so I know exactly what I am signing over, and that is so, so important. So yeah, be very aware what you are signing and understand what that means to the creative work that you are putting out there. And it is sometimes good just to have projects that you don't mind, you know, giving away a lot of that work, and then projects that you want to, you know, retain more rights over. And that's okay to separate the two and to be very forceful about what is important to you, you know, like stand up for yourself. Sometimes you're one of the only people who will do that.
Yeah, I agree with Darcy so much in terms of contract, and not just with companies, but with also the people that you co-create anything with. On more than one occasion, you know, in my young career, I had signed a contract, reading it and not fully understanding, and then having another friend of mine who, you know, is dealt with movies and all this and that, look at the contract and be like, you're getting screwed, man. Like, you don't even know that you just gave away all your rights, and you don't even know that. And having fallouts with the people that you're working with then still, because you're still in partnership with them, and going, what did you told me one thing on the phone, and then I signed something else in reality. And like, you know, how, like, where's your ethics, your morality, you know, like in this business, it's like that. Like, people want to hang on to as much as they can without giving away anything to somebody who earned it. You know, like, especially when you're the artist, like if you're working with a writer and you're world building, I mean, that's what my role is as the artist. If I'm working with a writer in partnership, it's like, you know, I'm giving my design elements, my characterizations, how people react to one another, like the narrative, the visual narrative. I mean, there are so many facets that come with the artistic side of it that, you know, aren't born inside of the written page. And we get nothing out of it. We get a page rate and maybe a little tiny cut of the publishing, you know. But when it gets transferred over to different media, and I've had this happen, you know, where our property was picked up and almost making it the pilot, and like I was seeing peanuts because the writer was like, "Well, this is my thing." It's like, well, I drew 2 volumes of this, and I helped you create these worlds, and you're using my visuals inside of your lookbook to help get people really thirsty for this property, and like I get nothing for it. You know what I mean? So be careful with like who you work with, who you work for. Always get somebody to like read over your contract and make sure that it's doing right by you. Yeah, it's like I can't even remember the origins of the question, because like that part is so important. And you know, touch back on like, you know, the abuses suffered inside this industry. Like, I am so sorry that happened. I am so sorry that happened. That is total garbage. And like, that is absolutely part of the reason why I separated from the group. And like, these are like people like higher ups, like creators, higher up creators, who would sit around in a circle and talk smack and laugh at the stuff. I know exactly who you're talking about at Dark Horse. Everybody does in this industry when you talk about that person, that piece of trash. And like, these guys would all laugh about it. And I'm like, what is this, who we're supposed to work with? This is our community? Yeah, right, man. I took my stuff and I'm like, I want nothing to do with y'all, man. I have nothing to do with that side of this business, man. So I mean, like, and like, I obviously, like, I get heated up about this because it's like nothing gets done. And like, when this is at the movement of like, you know, females are really starting to like be heard, but nothing on the inside was happening. maybe on Twitter, some people would be like, yeah, throw support. These guys who are supporting you on Twitter, like, yeah, you know, you got an ally over here. And then at the hotel lobby, you know, with the Comic Cons, they're talking crap about these people, man. Or like I used to be part of this like group that would like, you know, do group chats and like while you work. I did it one time and I was like, this group of people are not for me, man, because they hop on Twitter acting like, you know, they're social justice warriors and then turn around and in private are just like gross, disgusting, gross people, man. So I'm so sorry and I have so much sympathy for you. That is totally just utterly unacceptable. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I mean, I keep thinking about like the whole Stanley, you know, Jack Kirby conundrum. Like, who do you know, who earned more money on behalf of the creative development and stuff? And Jack Kirby kind of got screwed over because, you know, he thought he was going in 50-50 back in the day, and this has been ongoing, and now, you know, they both have passed on, but they set sort of a precedence of the stuff that can, it just keeps cycling over and over and over again, you know, as an example. And, you know, Jack Kirby probably did it because he loved doing it and he was having a blast doing it, but then when you get into the money aspect of it, you know, you really got to watch yourself. So, you know, if it's easier when you get into this to have an agent to handle that, if you don't feel like you can handle it on your own or you have questions and stuff, that's one route you can go. Or you can go and you can learn all these things about contract fine print and royalties, but it takes a lot of research and stuff. So the business side of it is a whole different thing, that you either need a very healthy support system through an agent or through somebody that can help you with paperwork and stuff, or you need to devote the time and effort and maybe take a business class or go online and understand what it is you need to learn for your own protection of your, you know, your ideas, for your self-worth and your finances and stuff.
And it sounds like it's dangerous in that it's a form of art that many of us, you know, developed a love for when we were young, and we carry that with us. And again, these sort of realities don't really occur to, I suspect, lots of fans and certainly lots of academics, right, who are more comfortable looking at the work on the page than the circumstances that kind of produce that. And I imagine that must be frustrating for you as creators when there's a foreground on the product and a very difficult process can be ignored sometimes.
I think communicating, like learning to know your work style and what you're capable of doing without burning out. I know the first like 10 years, I would say, when I was doing comics, it was a cycle of like taking on work, not giving myself enough time, or having the people that hired me to do it not giving me enough time, me feeling the obligation that I couldn't say no and that I couldn't ask for more time. So I would work myself literally until I got sick, and then I would be sick for like, you know, I would have like 2 to 3 relapses of something that anybody else would have kicked in like a couple of days, because your immune system's just shot from lack of sleep, you know, getting these comic books done. So one thing I really learned when I apprenticed with Howard Chaykin, he has this whole sort of setup on what needs to get done and how. And it's really like the most perfect layout plan for commercial artwork. And he told me, treat it like commercial artwork, because that's what you're doing. And if you want to do your own, you know, project on the side and spend 5 days on a splash page because that's for you, you know, and you want to do it and you need to do it that way, that's fine. But when it's jobs from Marvel or DC or Vertigo or whatever else, like, you have to get the stuff done. You need to find the shortcuts to get those things done, and be reliable and be realistic about your deadlines and everything else. And I think that's one of the hardest things as an artist to learn in this industry, because it's so easy for them to want you to do like a book in 30 days, you know. And they have artists, you know, over a lot of the time they hire out from, you know, outside of America because the dollar is worth less. So they can pay European artists or pay artists from Mexico and stuff a little bit less. And those artists are so fast. And because the discrepancy in the dollar, you know, maybe they can sustain themselves off of doing books, whereas we can't because we're here. You know, I live in California. It's ridiculously expensive. And the housing market where I live just keeps going up and up. And I've had friends that literally have gotten pushed out of state because of the cost of housing. So I'm always on 2 or more jobs. I try to cap it at 4 projects at a time, but I'm constantly juggling multiple projects, and that's what I have to do to survive in this industry. It's just the reality of it. But I wish it wasn't like that. I wish, you know, comic book artists and writers could unionize or something, and we could establish set pay rates and allow ourselves more time to work on things, and a whole lot of changes in the industry. But
look, I hate to interrupt this discussion, which is just really fascinating, and I'm seeing people in the chat really engaged with this, but we have kept our guests about 15 minutes longer than we said we would, and you know, I'm sure everyone's feeling a little bit of Zoom fatigue. Let me just say thank you all very much for being here. I really appreciate it. We're really grateful to you. If we were together in a room, we would give you a big round of applause, but unfortunately we can't. So let me just say thanks very much. I think I'm going to kick things over to Negan right now, who's going to say a couple of things about this evening's panel. We'll at least see Kyle there, I believe. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, a huge miigwech to Darcy, Weshoyot, Kyle, Lucas for you for hosting. You know, it's a huge miigwech to all of you for such a wonderful panel. The question that was asked before is, would Marvel do anything other than superheroes? There was this kind of interesting moment where, which leads into our panel for tonight, where I was a kid that was I was like Darcy, like really big into DC properties. I was a big Justice League person. I was really big, the only one Marvel property was Spider-Man. I kind of dipped over there, but generally it was Justice League. And I had this moment in 1990, which I think you're all, well, I mean, some of you are on this side of the US-Canada border, but in 1990, it's a seminal moment for Indigenous peoples in this country because it results in the activism which leads to the world of today. 2 seminal events. One was Elijah Harper said no to the new Canada's Constitution, which was this huge moment in the country. And then also the Mohawk Warriors and Ellen Gabriel and all the other people from Ganawake stood up against the Canadian government, which sent their military to go and try to remove them off of their land. And I mean, it was kind of that moment for many young Indigenous peoples on the other side of the border, Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, that kind of moment. And in 1990, I was reading Justice League, and I remember one of my cousins sort of pointed out or said, you know, you read so much about justice, but like, when are you going to do justice? And it was kind of that moment for me where I realized that the real superheroes was my father, going out and fighting for people to you know, stay out of jail, being one of the only Indigenous lawyers in the country. It was people like my auntie who was going out and saving the water and protecting the water. And I realized that I was surrounded by superheroes like Elijah Harper to stand up against the country, or all those incredible women like Ellen Gabriel who were standing up. So tonight, we're going to see a book, which Kyle is involved in, called This Place, where we retell Canada from 150 years. We're going to be joined by other contributors. You'll see there's Lucas right there showing the cover. We're going to be joined by Sonia Sue, Brendan Mitchell, Kyle will be there, Tara Odeber, Gregory Kamichuk, or GMB Kamichuk. David Robertson's going to join us again, Donovan Yasik. Katteri's going to be there, who's part of hosting the symposium, and of course I'll be there as well. It'll be all hosted by Candida Rifkin, who is one of the kind of most important voices on comic books throughout Winnipeg, works at the University of Winnipeg. She's done this incredible Indigenous comics annotated bibliography for kind of comics all throughout Turtle Island. But like, check it out, 6 p.m., so that's 2 hours from now. Make sure to get off Zoom for 2 hours and go outside, because if you're on Treaty 1 Deer, it's beautiful. Has anyone ever seen how beautiful? Are you guys is the weather nice wherever you are?
Oh,
No,
it's
it's
raining.
pretty.
Just looked out the window.
Oh.
we have sun here in California for once, so we're in between rainstorms.
Yeah, well, right here in Treaty 1 territory, where we're just emerging out of a really terrible winter of minus 50 degrees, it's beautiful right now. Like, you can actually sort of see how beautiful it is over there. It's just gorgeous. So everyone go outside, take a breath, enjoy yourself for a couple hours, and then come back and learn and enjoy and experience in the final panel of the Indigenous Comic Symposium. Miigwech to everybody, and we'll see you in 2 hours.
Miigwech.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.